In this lecture, we're going to build a football team C++ class and enable it to be used in Qt Quick with list properties. We're basically going to define our QML element like this, football team, and inside we're going to have a bunch of players, and we want to make it so that the QML engine is going to take the players that we have here in QML and build C++ objects on the C++ side, and this is going to work flawlessly. The goal in this lecture is to put together the plumbing necessary for all this to work. We're going to go to Qt Creator and do that. Here we are in Qt Creator. We're going to create our project. It's a Qt Quick application as usual. We're going to call it Object List and Properties Demo. Save it in a location on our drive. Choose our Qt version. Choose our kit here. Finish. The first thing we want to do is to create our football team class. It should inherit Q object as usual. We also want to create our player class. Let's do that. Player. It's going to inherit Q object as well. Player is going to have a bunch of properties. I'm going to just put them in here because I don't want to type all this. Let's fix the typo here. Control A, Control I to align, to have things aligned nicely. We want to generate all the methods that we need to get this working. I am going to refactor, generate methods, refactor on the second Q property here, generate, refactor on the third Q property here, generate. You see that a player can have a name whether or not they are playing, which is represented by a bool value, and their position, which is also a string. We want to grab all these fields and make them available as private fields. We're going to go down here and make them private. And we want to move a bunch of these methods in the CPP file, their implementations. We're going to start with name here, move to CPP, playing, move to CPP, position, move to CPP, set name, move to CPP, set position, move to CPP, set playing, move to CPP. Let's go back to the header and see what we can do. This is not good enough yet. I'm going to capture all the slots, move them in the public section of the class, align things nicely. So that things are a little bit more readable, because things can get messy pretty quick here. Okay, our class looks better. This is our player class. Nothing fancy really. We just created the class, put in a bunch of properties. We want to go to the football team class, include our player class. We also want to put in a bunch of properties that I have prepared before to save on typing time. Control A, Control I. The first one is the title for the team, the name for the coach, which is a string. We also have a player who is going to be the captain of the team. We're going to generate the methods. We want to do the coach. Let's do that. And do the player here, refactor. And you see that we have fields generated for us. I want to cut out these fields, go down here, create a private section, put in these fields, Control A, Control I to align. I want to move these methods in the CPP file. You already know how to do that. Set title, we move to CPP. Set coach, we move to CPP. set captain, we move to CPP. I think this is our last. We take these slots, move them to the public section of the class, take out the text here, and align this nicely so that it is presentable. We also want to do the same here. Okay, this is all. Our class looks nice and neat now. Now we want to enable it to have list properties. The first thing we want to do is to import QQML list property. Let's do that. And we want to create a Q property here. It's going to be QQML list property around player type. And it's going to say players. We want to hit enter because this is going to generate the names for the getter, the setter, and the notify signal. Okay, this also generated a setter that we don't need. So we're going to take out this set players. We don't need it because this QML list property here is going to wrap around a collection container that we're going to define in here. Let's actually do that. We're going to define a Q vector that is going to store pointers to player, and let's call it M players. We need to include Q vector for this to work. And if you don't know what a Q vector is, it is a matter of selecting it, hitting F1 here, go in the help mode. It is going to tell you it is a template class that provides a dynamic array. It allows you to store a bunch of objects inside, and you have a host of methods and operations you can do on that container. I'll leave you to read the documentation if you don't know what a vector is. Let's go back to our code, close this. We can click on this Q property and generate the missing Q property members. It's going to generate a players method for us, and it should have generated a players changed signal here. We actually don't need to pass in any parameter for now. So we're going to take that out and take out the spaces. And we want to refactor this method to be in CPP. Let's go down and look at this method. This method returns a QML list property that wraps around the player class. What this is really saying is that the class that is defining this, in this case, football team, is going to have a property that takes a bunch of players, and I am going to wrap around a bunch of methods that are going to be usable by the QML engine to manipulate the vector that stores the players internally in C++. I hope this makes sense. So what we're going to do is go down in here and return QQML list property. It is going to wrap around player because we want to have a list of players in QML. The first parameter is going to be an object that is going to manage the life of this list of objects. It is this football team here. The second pointer points to the wrapper data. In this case, it is the football team that holds the items. The third parameter is going to be the append method. We want to pass an address to it. So we're going to say football team append player. This is what we call it. We haven't defined it yet. The second method is going to give us the player count. So we're going to say football team player count. The third method is going to return a player at a given index. So we're going to say football team player. And the last method is going to allow us to clear the list or the vector of players that we have in this class of football team. So we're going to say football team clear players. And this is really all we need to return in here. We return a QML list property that wraps around players, and it's going to enable us to have list property capabilities in QML, and these methods are going to be used to manipulate the vector that we have in here. In other words, when you define your list like this, the QML engine is going to see that you have a list of players, and it's going to add these players one by one. How does it do that? It is going to call the append player method that we defined it here. But these are just like blueprints of the methods that we have to define. We have to actually define these methods in the C++ class, the header file, so that the QML engine knows what to do when it needs to append an item, clear the list, and things like that. We are going to define these methods in the private section here. Control A, Control I. The append player method is going to take a list and the player that we want to append to the list. The player count is going to take the list to return the player count for, and you get the idea. We just talked about this in the slides. What we need to do now is to implement these methods in the CPP file. Let's do that. Player count, player, and last but not least, clear players. And we need to pass in some names because we are going to do some manipulations in here. This is going to say list, and the player is going to say player. This is going to be a list as well. List. The other is going to be the index because we want to retrieve the player at a given index in this list. And here we are going to pass in the list that we want to clear. Okay, now we have our methods here, but these methods are going to need to operate on the vector that we have in here. But we may also need to manipulate this vector from other places in our code without needing to use these methods because these are specifically designed to be used by the QML engine. I am going to define a bunch of other public methods that are going to manipulate the list, and we are going to use them inside these QML engine specific methods, and this is going to give us a chance to use them when we need them later. I actually put those in the signals section. I should make them public like this and implement the method refactor add definition in CPP, refactor add definition in CPP, refactor add definition in CPP, and refactor and add definition in CPP. I should also give names to the parameters here. Let's say index. Again, these custom methods are going to manipulate this vector directly. So to append a player, we just say mplayers append player. To get the player count, all we need to do is to return mplayers count. Okay, the vector has a method that returns the count. We want to get a player at a given index. We can return mplayers at index. This is going to work fine. And if we want to clear the vector, we're going to say mplayers clear. We have a method here. Now we can return back to our methods specifically defined for use by the QML engine when it wants to manipulate the vector to add, clear, or get something from the vector. Before we do that, I want to come back to the documentation for QML list property. You can see this if you search for this in the documentation. The thing I want you to pay attention to now is the second pointer here that we passed. And we passed this pointer to be a pointer to the current class, which is the football team class. So we can cast this pointer here to a football team and manipulate the football team, which is what we're going to do in a minute. So what we can say is reinterpret cast. We want to cast to football team pointer. And what we want to cast is list data, which is what we passed as the second pointer here. And we can say now append player custom, the method we just defined to add a player to the vector, and say player. I hope this makes sense. Player count is also going to work the same way, really. We're going to copy this thing and return. We forgot an R here. Player count custom, this is what we're going to return. This is going to return a player at a given index, so we can say return reinterpret cast player custom. This is going to take an integer. We are going to pass the index, and the player pointer that we get from this is going to be returned by this function here. We want to clear the list. No problem. We can reinterpret cast get a pointer to the football team and say clear players custom. I know there are a lot of moving parts for this to work, but the bulk of it is to have your property for list defined. So it is QML list property. It is going to wrap around the players, and we have a read method, which is players that we have here. We have a notify signal that is going to be emitted every time something changes about this list. Our players method returns a blueprint that wraps around the methods that the QML engine is going to use to manipulate our internal storage of players, which is stored in a vector right now. So we have an append method. The order is important. The first method is going to be an append method. The second method is going to be a method to get the count. The third method is going to be a method to get an item at a given index. The fourth method is going to be the method to clear the data in your storage container that you have in your class. And in our case, it happens to be a vector. Notice that you have to pass your player class, which is really an item class that you want to wrap around in QML. This is really all there is to having a list property feature built into your football team class here. Now we can go to main CPP and expose this class. We're going to include the classes that we need here. We're going to include player. We are also going to include football team, and we want to register these types. The registration is nothing new. Control A, Control I. We say QML register type. We say player. It's going to be in a module that we call com_football, measure and minor version, and the name that this thing is going to be available as in QML. We forgot to capitalize the B here. And for the football team, it is the same, com_football. It is going to be the same module, measure minor version, and it is going to be available as football team in QML. We can fall over to our QML file, import our modules. It's going to be com_football 1.0. Let's double check again. I think I have a typo in here. It is football, no capital in the middle. I'm going to copy it to play it safe, com_football, and it is going to recognize this. And notice that I can say football team right in here. It's going to have a title. Let's call this Rayon, a team from my country. The coach can be anyone. They have a captain that can be a player. Okay, you see that our thing is taking shape in here. The player can have a name. I think the player can have also a position. Let's say middle field. And the player can be playing or not playing. So we're going to say playing. The captain is going to be playing, so we set this to true because this is stored as a bool value, if I remember correctly. Yes, it is. Okay, let's try and build this and run it just to see that we have no boo-boos. We have a problem here, const. This is going to be a good learning opportunity. This cannot be exposed as const because we want to be modifying things wrapped inside here. So this method can't be const. Let's go back to CPP and also change it not to be const. Let's build again. And we seem to have a clean build. Let's run the application. And we have an empty window, which is what we expect because we have no other visual elements inside here. I want to assign items to the players property here. I'm going to put in my players in an array, and I am going to say player. Let's put the same properties just to save on typing time. Put a comma here. Put another player down here. Let's just put in 3 players. And what I'm going to do, the first one is going to be player 1. Let's name the captain. And the second one is going to be player 2. Third one is going to be player 3. And I want to come to the football team, add a QDebug class because we are going to debug output something, QDebug. And we want to know when the append player custom method is called. We're going to say QDebug add in player to vector. This is going to be enough. Let's run the application. We should see a call to this 3 times because we are adding 3 players in QML, and this is a proof that the plumbing that we did is working. Okay, adding player to vector, adding player to vector, adding player to vector. We can actually output the names of these players that we are adding. Let's do that. We're going to say player name. Let's run the application. It should say adding player 1, player 2, and player 3, which is what we defined in QML here. And this is really how you define your class and enable it to have properties that are lists. We can also do some minor manipulations to the football team we have in here. Let's give it an ID. Let's call it team 1. And when the component is loaded for this window, we're going to say component on completed console log and say we have and say team 1 players length because it's going to be stored as an array, and say players let's say the team title, and it's going to say we have 3 players in the team rayon spore if this is working correctly, and this is exactly what we have here. Just to show you that you can use the data that you have in your football team to do some visual stuff, I am going to go down here, put in a list view that I have prepared to save some time on typing. Control A, Control I to align. You see that it really is nothing special. It is a list that is filling the entire window. The model is going to be team 1 players. We are getting all the players that we have in the football team. And the delegate is a rectangle that fills the width and a bunch of other obvious properties. Inside, we are just capturing the name field of the player and displaying that as an item in our list view. If this is working right, as we expect, we should have player 1, player 2, and player 3 displayed in our list view here. Let's run the application. Player 1, player 2, player 3. We are retrieving the list of players here and using it as a model for our list view here. This is cool, isn't it? We can actually add other players. If you don't believe me, we're going to add player name, let's say Daniel. Although I'm no player, I'm going to say none, and playing false. Let's run the application. Okay, you see that we have Daniel here. And ladies and gentlemen, this is how you enable your classes to be usable as list properties like this. The plumbing is really easy. I'm going to repeat one last time. You just have to provide your property as a QML list property, wrapping around your type that you define as you define any other type we've been using before. You have to provide a getter for the property here. In this case, it is player, and it returns a QML list property that wraps around the methods you're going to use to manipulate the storage container for your values in the class. And we define the methods to manipulate our vector here. This is really all there is to this. This is all for this lecture. In the next lecture, we're going to extend on this and make it work with inherited types. I'll see you in the next lecture.